It's a lot of fun to be here tonight. A few weeks before I was published, my publicist called me and told me that Publishers Weekly had requested a second copy of the Samaritan's pistol. And I says, does that mean they're going to pick it up and review it? And he says, we don't know. We've never had them request a second copy. And then he went on and he'd done a little bit of research, and he said it was really tough to have that happen. And I don't know that that's reflective of me or my story, but it's certainly a group honor coming from the Cache Valley League of Utah Writers, because when I came there, I literally did not know the difference between active and passive voice. And I rewrote the novel 8 full times over the course of about 3 years. And so it was kind of a group award, I think, to have Publishers Weekly say the kind things that they did about my story and about, not directly, but about all of the people who helped me with it. So Diane, Tim, Isaac, and Aaron, Ellen, Amanda, am I missing anybody else here who's listened to me drone on and on? Thank you. So one thing I love about Helicon is there's no censorship. So as Tim said, the protagonist Jim bumps into the mafia in the woods, and we're going to start there. So 90 minutes into the hike, Larry was breathing in gasps. Marcus and Simon, both older and heavier, looked haggard, their clothes now sweat-soaked and dirty. Johnny hadn't spoken since leaving the parking lot. "We do him right here," Marcus wheezed, the tone serious but lacking in volume. From the small of his back, he pulled a pistol, pressing the barrel under Larry's throat. Soon as he talks, we're back to golf. "I'm down," Simon agreed, sweat dripping from his nose and chin. "We get rooms in town and take turns watching the trailhead for a month." The men lasted longer than Larry expected. Loose softball-sized rocks and gravel made the footing more like a dry riverbed than a trail as it zigzagged up the wooded mountain. "Don't you guys want to get him off the trail?" Johnny asked. "Kid's got a point," Simon shrugged. "Who's to see us?" Marcus asked, waving the revolver around like a half-eaten candy bar. It's not like rush hour around here, for Christ's sake." "Do I really need to be here?" Johnny asked. "You like Porsches for Christmas?" Marcus responded with his own question. Johnny nodded. "When a truckload of our cash goes bye-bye, we look till we find it." Simon eyed his nephew for a few seconds. "How do we know this guy stole it?" Johnny pointed at Larry. "And how do we know the accountant is even in Wyoming?" "Because we know." Simon's tone indicated the conversation was over. "See this through," Marcus encouraged. "We'll tell your old man you done good." Larry's strength dissipated, weakening his knees. Like soldiers who found God in their foxholes, his mind turned to his maker. "If God saves me, I'll live better. If not, I'll die brave." A warm wind caressed Larry's skin. His nostrils took some of it in, but with it came the odor of pines and trail dust. A shove and he stumbled as Simon pushed him from the trail and then yanked on the leash. They walked him into a shallow ravine, startling a small bird into flight. Lodgepole pines and dumpster-sized granite boulders dotted the forest thickly enough that there wasn't a clear line of sight longer than 50 yards. They came into an aspen grove a few minutes later with a single pine tree close to the middle. After looking around in every direction, Simon picked up a limb and walked toward Larry, who stood a half-foot taller than his attacker. Simon swung the branch with both hands. It snapped into 3 pieces, ripping an agonizing shriek from Larry as it struck his knee. "Tea time," Marcus said. Larry fell, clumsy and twisting, the pain radiating all the way to his hip and toes. Simon grabbed an even larger limb, stepped over Larry and handed it to Johnny grabbed an even larger limb, stepped over Larry, and handed it to Simon. Larry curled up in the fetal position, but with his hands bound behind his back, he couldn't protect his head. A shoe heel smashed Larry's lips into his teeth. Shapes and blurry images appeared through his left eye, as though he was underwater. "I'm not scared," he thought, and the warm wind returned. Marcus wound up, telegraphing a kick to the chest. Larry rolled into it, taking the blow with his shoulder. "Ready to talk?" Simon asked. Larry spat blood on the ground, his mouth refilled, and he spat again. A clump of grass prickled his cheek, so he lifted his head to better see his blurry attackers. "You pussies can't kick." "Talk," Johnny said. "Just tell them." Adrenaline fed the fire roaring in Larry's belly, removing some of the pain, but instead of spitting, he swallowed and the flames sputtered. Duke's the dog, love the dog, stood at point, studying a spot in the trail as Jim rounded the corner. A bark, not happy or angry, but intense, told Jim he was onto something. "What you got, boy?" Jim tied Sam and the first horse in the pack string to the limb of a deadfall tree, then walked up to the energized dog. Duke often alerted him to deer or elk tracks, and Jim paid attention. It helped create a working knowledge for later in the year when the big game hunters came visiting. Instead of animal prints, he found footprints. 4 sets of tracks, 2 of dress shoes and 2 of athletic, marked the trail. The tracks headed into the woods, but stopped, turning down a shallow gully. Someone's got sore feet, Jim thought, about 3 miles to the parking lot as he traced a dress shoe imprint with his fingertips. Curiosity insisted he investigate. Not wanting the dog to get too far ahead, Jim decided to take Sam. The slip-knotted lead rope undid easily from the tree and he swung into the saddle. "Let's take a look," he said, reining the horse to follow the tracks into the gully. 200 yards further, Jim came around a boulder at the edge of a clearing. 3 men stood there. 2 were dressed in knee-length shorts and golf shirts, and 1 looked like a skater. The 3 limbed over an enormous black man, bound and bloody. The 2 golfers carried handguns tucked in their short shorts at the small of their backs. Jim's mind raced and his eyebrows dropped into a scowl. The victim's hands were fastened behind his back. The largest man was winding up with a club like a woodchopper splitting firewood. Duke's growl stopped him. "What the fuck?" the man said, spinning around. "Stop right there," Jim shouted. "Who the fuck are you?" "Step away," Jim ordered. The men didn't move. The man dropped his club. "We found him here." The tone was friendly. "Do you have a first aid kit?" "I said step away." The man responded after looking at his 2 companions. "I was offering him a stick to help him up." "With the club above your head?" The other man, the one on the side opposite the tattooed skater, spoke for the first time. "Only way this turns out good is if you turn around and forget this." At least they aren't bullshitting anymore, Jim thought. "What about him?" Jim nodded at the man on the ground. "What about him?" The tattooed young man puffed out his chest. "He'll be okay." Both golfers turned to look momentarily at the tattooed young man and thought as if he'd thrown ice water in their faces. His bloody clothes and messed up face don't say so. Jim's neck itched, but he refused to scratch. "He's fine, you fucking hick." The young man stepped forward. "Leave while we're in a good mood." "Every litter has a runt," Jim muttered to himself. "What did you say?" the young man demanded. Jim didn't respond, his eyes moving across the men's hands, making sure not to focus for too long on any one thing. "You have no idea what this is." The man used a combination of words Jim hadn't heard since boot camp. "His tattoos are scarier than the language." Jim pressured his stirrups to make sure Sam would stand. Blood pulsed through his temples and eyelids. His nose twitched and adrenaline sped his heart to twice its normal speed. But Jim focused on his military training. Watch their hands, project strength, and if you're lucky, they'll back down. Under closed lips, Jim's jaw hung loose and he exhaled through his mouth. He decided against drawing his pistol, thinking it would make things worse. Duke growled, baring his teeth as his hackles rose, then lunged forward with a bark. "Call off the mutt," the tattooed young man yelled. The man on the left grabbed his pistol, but before he could take aim, Jim drew his own weapon and fired. The bullet tore through the man's heart. Duke charged. The 2 remaining men drew but paused, watching Duke leap on the falling body. Correcting, they brought their weapons to bear on Jim, but his second shot shattered the second golfer's skull. The tattooed runt shot in the same instant, missing Jim but hitting Sam high in the chest between the horse's front legs with a dull thud that vibrated up into the saddle. Another bullet whizzed over Jim's head as Sam staggered. Leaping from the horse and landing on his feet, Jim stepped toward the runt, who backed up with a fearful look. The young man shot from his heels, missed to the left. Jim shot, and the young man clutched his chest and fell sideways, his tattooed arms beneath his lifeless body. Jim stood for a moment. He exhaled and reholstered his pistol. Before dropping to his hands and knees, his stomach convulsed, and he vomited his scant breakfast into the dirt. Drunk with adrenaline, the earth reeling beneath him, Jim gritted his teeth, refusing to pass out. Thinking about Sam and Duke's barking, drowning out the ringing in his ears, he stood. Duke growled, bolting between 3 bodies, his hackles still on alert. Sam lay on his side, head resting in the grass. The horse's great bellow lungs moved air through his nostrils, wiggling the stems, but as Jim sprinted towards him, it slowed. Sam was going to die. Tears sprang to Jim's eyes as he collapsed next to the horse. Duke nosed the horse's lip. After smelling his breath for several seconds, he whimpered. The scent of internal blood told him Sam would soon be gone, and he curled up next to the horse's neck. Jim sleeved away the tears and took aim at his dying friend. His fourth shot seemed louder than all the other three combined. Gun to his side, he wiped his eyes with his free thumb, the tears soaking into callous, dirty skin. He remembered sleeping in the barn to witness the birth. A perfect buckskin coat surprised him coming from a brown bay quarter-horse mare and a jet-black Arabian stud. Sam was the best horse Jim had trained, capable of running for miles, the gift of endurance from Arabian ancestors mixed with the pleasant disposition of a quarter-horse mother. 10 minutes ago I was headed home, and now Sam and 3 men are dead? He wanted to wish away the reality, and yet the ugly truth surrounded him. Jim reholstered the pistol and stepped over Sam's neck. The fury growing in his stomach projected onto everything in view. He hawked, then spit some of the vomit residue from his mouth as he approached the man. "Thanks for helping me." The man mumbled through split lips. The words came out slowly, scarcely more than a whisper. "You saved my life." Jim untied the leash from the man's swollen hands and cut the zip ties. Returning to Sam's side, he yanked free the saddlebags from beneath the horse's body, where it came free in a tug-of-war lurch. From the bottom of the bags, he pulled out his first aid kit containing peroxide bandages, antibiotic ointment, and latex gloves. This next part I want to read is after Jim gets home and goes to bed. My favorite part of the novel. Larry's sobering words itched like a mosquito bite in Jim's head as he got ready for bed. Being on the run from the mafia would have seemed preposterous as he woke up on the horse blankets that morning. Now the prudent thing to do was to take Larry up on his offer, but the lack of alternatives angered him. The only other thing he could think of was to sit at home and wait for the hitmen to show up. Jim wanted to shoot them all, but he knew he was already lucky to be alive. He'd been stupid to get involved in the first place. These men had no scruples about torturing someone or killing in cold blood. As he replayed the scene in his mind, it was shocking how little regard they held for life. To them, killing Larry and himself was no big deal, like making a phone call or using the restroom. Hollywood movies were literally Jim's only window into the world of organized crime, and probably not the most accurate window at that. He remembered watching The Godfather and Goodfellas and hated the characters. Bedazzled with jewelry and tailored suits, they seemed like overdressed clowns. Jim undressed, brushed his teeth, and tried to sleep, but he couldn't stop thinking about the day's events. They would find a way to kill him if he stayed on the ranch, and he doubted anyone from the community, other than Albert Johnson, the local sheriff, would help. Jim wasn't Mormon, but it was the predominant religion of the area. He'd lived among them all his life, except for his 4 years in the Army, and he'd always felt like an outsider. If someone was speaking at church and he wanted to hear, he would attend. He'd also go to some of the social functions where some well-meaning neighbors invariably tried to talk to him about his beliefs, and he would politely decline. Sally had invited him to listen to the church's missionaries after high school, but the spiritual awakening she prayed for never quite materialized. The Book of Mormon didn't accomplish what the missionaries promised it would, give him an overpowering spiritual witness of the faith's authenticity, and he'd read it twice. Deep inside, I'm a skeptic. He'd realized the fact about himself in high school. He'd gone to see a hypnotist with a few of his friends. The hypnotist had called several people up on stage and told them to extend their arms. They counted down from the number 10. With each descending number, their arms would feel twice as heavy. As it became unbearable, it would be okay to drop them. 10, 9, 8, 7. Strange music played in the background while they were told to breathe slowly, but nothing got heavier. If anything felt different, it was simply fatigue. Jim heard other people's arms slap their bodies. Because he was the only person with arms still extended, the hypnotist whispered in his ear, "This isn't working for you, is it?" "No." "What isn't working for me?" The hypnotist dismissed him to sit in the audience as 9 of his friends became mindless pawns, their dignity sacrificed for the performance. They danced like Michael Jackson, walked like ducks, and screamed for their favorite horse at a race. Feeling left out, Jim approached the hypnotist after the performance and asked why the spell hadn't worked. The explanation was unexpected. "You have a literal mind," the hypnotist had said. "Most people believe what they're told, but you don't. As I counted backwards, you checked to make sure your arms were the same. The difference between you and the others is you prove things to yourself first." Jim had wondered through the years what the hypnotist meant. It made him think about organized religion and the crazy things people did, drinking poison Kool-Aid, crusading to reclaim the Holy Land. And it wasn't just Christians. Muslims flew airplanes into buildings. What a bunch of stupid bastards believing whatever they're taught or told, Jim thought. Did the men who drew their guns on him today act on a belief system? When the Mormon missionary said he would feel all sorts of wonderful impressions, he waited, only to be disappointed. Maybe he was spiritually dead or inept, or maybe he wasn't as influenced by their power of suggestion. Their advice had been simple: pray more and pray harder. It seemed obvious then, and it had ever since, that what they meant was, trust us, your arms are getting heavier. They really are. Even if they don't feel different, they are. 20 years later, Jim knew the impression had shaped his life. At the same time, he discovered a connection in the poetic lyrics of a favorite song. No, his mind is not for rent to any god or government. Rush's song resonated, speaking to his bone-deep pragmatism. I definitely need to dig through my old music stash. Jim switched gears and thought about the few spiritual impressions he had had. The closest thing to faith-promoting tingle came when he'd helped or received help from other people. The words of his favorite hymn, "A Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief," played through his head. He felt good knowing he'd saved Larry's life. Maybe the song had it right. "These deeds shall thy memorial be. Fear not. Fear not, thou didst them unto me." The hymn was sung at Bradley's funeral after the Gulf War. Whatever God was, Jim hoped deeds done with a pistol might count. With the long day over and the adrenaline gone, he finally drifted off to sleep. He dreamt of riding through the mountains with Sam. Sam's thundering hoofs powered them across a meadow. The wind pushed it across his face, tugging at his shirt and making his eyes water. They galloped into the woods, jumping over deadfall trunks, weaving around boulders at a reckless pace. Sam leapt into a stream and charged out of the woods through another meadow and around a sagebrush hill. Jim bent low, moving his weight over the horse's neck. His cowboy hat flew off in a gust, his string tugging at his neck, wagging like an out-of-control kite caught in his tailwind. Together they ran for miles, pushing for something he couldn't quite recall, moving because they could, driven by instinct, heading wherever felt right. They came to the end of the world, a great precipice where birds flew beyond the edge, toward an eclipsed black sun. Its light cast long shadows with rainbows trimming the edges as though viewed through a prism. Jim dismounted. "Thanks for the ride." I've lost a few horses. "Thanks for the ride." He wrapped his arms around the horse's steaming neck, feeling heat and perspiration stain his shirt. Sam's ears were strained forward. He stood gazing fixedly out into nothingness, perhaps hearing something meant only for the souls of horses. Sam bent down, looking at the abyss. Then a great snort and a stomping front hoof sent small rocks tumbling over the edge. Sam relaxed as Jim petted him. They stood for a long time, both confused by the edge of nothingness. Thank you.